We recently launched Liberation Martial Arts Online for trainers, collectives, and individuals that were looking for a program to follow that was chud free or perhaps one that came directly from us. Thanks to Mark Katz, Zachary Dakery Doc, and Rita Kapadia for signing up. If you would like to sign up for Liberation Martial Arts Online, or you just want to increase your financial support, you can find special tiers on our Patreon. If you'd like to listen to all of our shows without any breaks or interruptions, you can find uncut versions of our shows also on Patreon. This is Sam.
This is Jason.
And this is Fight Study.
Coach Jason and I are back with another edition of Fight Study. We're coming to you on the 4th of July after another mass shooting, so you know, business as usual. This is consistent from its founding. What else is there to say, really? But let's talk about some MMA. We're going to look at UFC 276 and then preview a fight I'm looking forward to more than I did Adesanya versus Cannonier, which is Rafael versus Rafael. Anjos versus Fiziev. To help us break down these striking heavy fights, we're joined by the Southpaw Muay Thai correspondent, Ron King III. Welcome back, Ron.
Happy to be back, man.
Ron, can I call you RK3?
That is so funny. You know what's funny that you say that? That was my nickname when I wrestled in high school. Seriously.
Was it really?
Yeah, it was.
Right.
Nah, seriously. That's my nickname when I wrestled in high school. RK3. That was my old username for everything, too.
All right. Nice.
So let's talk about the people's main event first, which was Alexander the Great Volkanovski versus Max Holloway 3. Volkanovski's nickname was sort of a corny but obvious play on words at first, but boy, is he living up to that nickname now. That evolution is something you only see in anime or movie training montages. And it's getting to the point where it's hard to watch his fights because he is that dominant. It's like you might need a mercy rule just for this guy. So let's first start with you, Ron. How did their neck-and-neck rivalry become such a lopsided win for Volkanovski? Where did Volkanovski get better, and what did Holloway do wrong?
You know, honestly, I feel like it's less to do with anything that Holloway did wrong in particular, and more just so how fast Volkanovski is improving and just how fast he's become in general, like physically as well, because I've never seen Max Holloway just get pieced up that badly. And like you mentioned earlier, that was hard to watch because I actually really do like Max Holloway. I've always enjoyed his fighting style, even as especially as like a Muay Thai purist. And like watching Volkanovski just tear him apart like that for basically the entire fight. During the build up to the fight, I was super excited. I'm thinking, like this should have been a main event fight. Let me be very clear about this. This should have been the main event. This was the main event in my opinion. And, seeing how lopsided it got that fast really made me reassess what I originally thought about how good Volkanovski is able to become, especially if he moves up in weight class, because I don't really see anybody at 145 for him. If Max Holloway got beat up that bad, any other person at 145, that wouldn't have happened to him. I truly believe that. And it's to the point now where now I'm looking at the Korean zombie fight and the Brian Ortega fight where it's like basically the same thing happened. So is he just that much better than everybody? It's starting to look that way just from what I can see based on recent progressions, it's astonishing to watch in real time too, just how fast, despite his age, just how fast he's learning, he's adapting. His reflexes are getting better despite his age, actually. And because he slimmed down, you've got a guy who used to walk around at 200 pounds, carrying around the power of somebody who used to carry that weight legitimately as an athlete. And he also has the speed that's equivalent to flyweights, guys who walk around at 125, 135 pounds, which creates a nightmare matchup for anybody at featherweight, in my opinion.
Jason, in our preview, we said, what is there to change other than to do more of the same things you found success in? And I mentioned the thing that gave me the most pause, which was they both got better, but where Volkanovski got better in a variety of ways, Max improved in one area, which was boxing. And it ended up with both doing the things they found previous success in, except Volkanovski found way more success. Now, going back to what Ron said, Holloway made all the changes you would want him to make. It actually was the perfect game plan of leading, scoring points, not overcommitting, mixing in kicks and clinches and so forth. I give his team an A plus. But I think about what you and Zach said in our last episode, where you said, even if you do everything perfect, sometimes you're so outmatched, it doesn't matter. It's not about you, it's them. So, Jason, tell me about Volkanovski. How did he go from being one of the two best in the division to being in a class all by himself?
Well, I think Volkanovski has an outstanding fight IQ, and without a doubt, he's committed to being a better version of himself every fight, even as world champion. And that's why he's become world champion. And now the clear-cut best fighter in the world, in my opinion. And it's that commitment to improving. And it's some fighters, once they hit a certain level of success, they become a little less coachable because they know a lot themselves. But you always want a coach's eye. So you have an individual who is like immensely physically talented, has a lot of intangibles, but the physical intangibles like vision and reflexes to Ron's point. And if you look at a fighter who like is good at hand traps and baiting some high level stuff, all of a sudden develop a good jab. Like Volkanovski's jab and the speed of his jab was fucking bonkers this fight, especially against Max Holloway, who's got an excellent jab and a great counter right hand if you get lazy with it. But he employed that tactic for much of the fight, and he used it brilliantly. So his adaptability, his continuation of learning on the job is a testament to himself as a student of the game and a competitor. And I think that's why he's the best fighter in the world.
Ron, what were some clever tactical things you saw from either fighter?
Well, I'm going to piggyback off of what Jason said. And like the whole fight, I'm just watching Volkanovski's jab the whole fight, because that was really the main thing that stood out to me. Just the fact that he basically just shut down a lot of the volume striking that Max Holloway would have done to pretty much anybody else in that division with that jab. And one thing, I actually said it on Twitter that I don't think a lot of people take into account is that Volkanovski, he's 5'6". Based on the way athletes overestimate their height, he probably might really be 5'5". And he has a 71.5-inch reach, probably 72-inch reach. And basically, he has arms that are equivalent to somebody who's like 5'11" or 6 feet tall. So even with the height disadvantage he has against a lot of his opponents, even at featherweight, because he knows how to, he usually is training with people taller than him. I mean, I saw a video of him sparring with Izzy like last week, and even, Israel Adesanya, the former professional kickboxer, had a difficult time really being able to tee off on Volkanovski, which goes to show how intelligent and how refined his jab has become, especially just in the last handful of his fights alone.
I think that really threw Holloway off because I think they game planned for Volkanovski where they assumed he would be throwing a lot of leg kicks like he has in their previous two fights. But Volkanovski really didn't throw that many. It was more like Holloway was throwing it, and it became Volkanovski who was the jabber, except he had a much more devastating jab than Holloway. And it wasn't just a jab. He built off the jab. So it was almost like he was doing to Holloway what Holloway normally does to other people, except even better if possible.
One of the reasons why you didn't see a ton of leg kicks, especially in the first round from Volkanovski, is like Max Holloway's adjustment was really smart. His camp had him come in with that little Muay Thai lift. He lifted his lead leg and that little skip step coming in. He even tried to start off with what looked like a front leg teep to establish that concern or consideration. But when you're dealing with someone, like we said, with that kind of reflexes and that kind of like, those physical advantages, it's really hard to get like Volkanovski flinching, And so Volkanovski didn't hunt those leg kicks when the leg wasn't there or vulnerable, and they did a good job of adjusting Max Holloway's stance in trying to take that away. So he said, fuck it. If a leg kick isn't there, I'm going to draw out the jab with my own jab with the jab, or keep putting it on him. And I don't know if that was Volkanovski adapting on the fly or if that was part of their game plan, but he did it brilliantly. And I would have thought that he would have used that to bait some other stuff out, but he was having so much success with it that I would have thought, in a jab fest, you're probably going to pick the 5'11" Holloway all day, every day. And it's just not me lying on my Bumble profile about my height. Like all fighters do, without a doubt. So like, he's probably 5'5", but he has those long arms and he has that speed and ability to make up that distance. And in the timing factor, again, those are some things where like you can have all the goods, but if you don't have that timing and the confidence in that timing and the commitment to the strength and conditioning to have the cardio to support that, like that, you become incomplete. And Volkanovski is, at least as long as the UFC has been in existence, the most complete fighter I've ever seen.
Jason, we know how good Volkanovski is technically, but how much of his success is also because he has unparalleled physical gifts for the division?
Well, see, that's an outstanding question for sure, because speed and reflexes are required for the featherweight division. They just are. But he's so good that if it's only a marginal slowdown, he can still be very competitive and among the top 5 in the world, just because he is head and shoulders above everybody else at this point. Like, again, he is a very physically strong individual, and if he wanted to, like, I call it wall. Some people say wall install, or I call it wall and brawl. If you got any skills inside, you could throw some elbows off some of those pummel positions against the cage. But if Alexander Volkanovski lost a step, everyone else would still be 2 steps fucking behind. Like, that's how good he is right now. So he's gonna have to lose 2 or 3 steps, and then it'll get real competitive in the top 10.
Ron, do you see any vulnerabilities in Volkanovski's style?
Every fighter, even at the highest level, has vulnerabilities. But especially with Volkanovski currently right now, yeah, he's got some vulnerabilities, but if Max Holloway couldn't even exploit them, then it's now a matter of like, yeah, he has them, but are you good enough and are you fast enough and are you conditioned enough to really exploit them? That's really the main question. Because even where I thought he was vulnerable, getting caught on the inside and getting peppered with just combinations, which Max Holloway usually does, on the inside was where he was fucking Max Holloway up the most. He was like messing him up the most on the inside, because everything he landed, like I was rewatching the fight this morning again, and even on the slow-mo, like every time he got inside or slipped or blocked something, he came back with at least 2 to 3 more clean shots that hit directly on the face. It even led to like Max getting cut pretty early on in the fight, and that cut was really bad. Like, I'm shocked they didn't stop it, but I can see why. But even in like a pure Muay Thai fight, that cut where it was at probably would have gotten stopped, even in a pro Muay Thai fight, just because of where it was at. And that was early in the fight, so this wasn't even like later on in the fight, and he was teeing off on Max that quick and early.
And how often do we see a cut like that from a punch? I don't even remember the last time I've seen a cut like that from a punch. That says something about Volkanovski.
Goddamn right it does. I mean, he's like, his face parted like the Red fucking Sea. Just from a normal punch from a 145-pound man, or at least 145 pounds the day before. And normally the facial structure doesn't do that when punched. So that says something about Volkanovski is that rare breed of power, speed, cardio, and volume. So he's a stylistic matchup no matter what your fucking style. So like, unless you come up with a cheat code, you got a tall task in front of you. If he's 5'6" and named Alexander Volkanovski.
And after what Jason said last week of like, yeah, if the UFC offered somebody to take on like me or one of my fighters for like, $250,000 after this past weekend, honestly, you can pay me $1 million to fight that dude, to be honest. Like, because of the damage that Holloway took, I don't even think it's worth it. Because it seems like every time he fights somebody, the trajectory of their careers just changed completely,
He beats you down. he beats you down. And like, unless like all the credit to Max Holloway, because I mean, I don't know, like, did Kasparov beat Deep Blue or whatever? But if you're talking about fight IQ, like Volkanovski is the supercomputer, and fucking Max Holloway is Kasparov. I mean, super high level, super good decision maker, great with volume, and has the ability to mix in punches, kicks. We're talking about outstanding versus outstanding, and then you see what Volkanovski was able to do after 2 fights, taking in that information. And it's another example where I don't think Holloway slowed down. I still think he looked pretty good. I think his camp made some really good choices in how they decided to fight. It just didn't work out.
Yeah.
Jason, what did you think about Volkanovski's defense?
I really enjoy Volkanovski's defense because he's so good at using feints and an educated jab along with footwork as part of his defense. You know, you and I discussed before, Sam, about like how some fighters tend to over parry. We can talk about Sean Strickland and his ridiculousness, but a parry is part of a layered defense. You just don't keep swatting at a hand coming at your face. But Volkanovski can swat at that hand, touch, and then counter jab. He can slide off, shift forward, hit you with a right hook, or throw a right hand and walk it in and find that right hook left straight, and then just press you against the cage before you can get off any counter offense. So part of that layered attack, that layered approach, is part of his defense. You know, and when you work the use of a little drop step, or I call it a 6-inch drop, and you saw Volkanovski use that throughout the fight. He would throw his jab, then he would bring his jab hand back down low, like at his hip, so that he would have better balance and mobility, and he would retreat like 6 inches or a foot. And it didn't allow Holloway to counter strike at all. And actually threw a monkey wrench in Holloway's game plan, because Holloway was starting off with a lot of feints of his own and was hoping to draw out some leads and then counter strike. But, you know, Volkanovski put an end to that with a nice jab and a 6-inch drop. And he used that throughout the entire fight. So all part of a layered defensive consideration. And it made him, you know, more dominant than we've ever seen, and still incredibly hard to hit. Then it makes you realize that maybe, and I saw this, and I don't know who to give credit to, but someone said maybe we owe the Korean Zombie an apology. I think we fucking might. We might, right?
Yeah.
He's not washed. He just fought Alexander Volkanovski. That's it. That's really all.
In hindsight, it's like, what did we think would happen when somebody who's not Max Holloway challenges Volkanovski?
That's what happens. So, I mean, everything in context, and it's all relative. So, like, I still think KZ's got some miles on him.
I'm sure he watched this fight and was like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not washed.
Yeah, you talk about a little resurgence in your confidence after watching what Volkanovski did. It's pretty impressive stuff, really, to watch.
I mean, I know personally, I've had fights and matches where I'm like, what the hell? Like, is this my peak? Like, you just beat my ass that bad? And then I go on to see who the future opponents that whoever beat me beats, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right, so I don't suck. He's just that good. All right, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Sometimes it's not you, it's them. And anyone that's not Max Holloway, and even Max Holloway now, realizes that it's Alexander Volkanovski.
My own observations were Holloway couldn't keep up with Volkanovski's speed changes, his lateral movement, and Volkanovski's changeups from going first and third to second and fourth. Also, Holloway's boxing stance, which sort of looked like Aljamain Sterling's, where he was standing long but square and leaning forward, just left him open to Volkanovski's jabs and elbows. Volkanovski has a height and reach disadvantage, but Holloway's stance actually negated that. But I understand why Holloway did it, because he wanted to touch Volkanovski. Also, Holloway was so hyperfixated on looking at Volkanovski's head. If you look at Holloway's eyes, he's so serious. He's so focused. Instead of when we see Holloway at his best, where he's kind of having fun and he's flowing, he's just so committed to the task. And maybe this was because of Volkanovski's taunts. But because of that, because of where his eye line was, he couldn't see what was coming from below, like up jabs and uppercuts. Whenever Volkanovski dropped his hand low, Holloway's gaze didn't drop with it. He just kept looking straight ahead. So when the jab came up, Holloway just couldn't see it. It came from below his eye line. When the shorter man, Volkanovski, would throw an uppercut, Volkanovski couldn't see it. And the fucked up part was, in their previous fights, it was Holloway who was having success with uppercuts because Volkanovski was the shorter guy and was coming in really low. But this time it was Holloway almost coming in a little bit too low and crouched. So a lot of that had to have been in-fight adjustments by Volkanovski because Volkanovski couldn't have known those were the adjustments that Holloway was going to make. So I think Jason brought this up, but after round one, right, you saw a different game plan. Not completely different, but from Volkanovski, you saw these adjustments. So that's why round one looked like it could have gone either way. And then the rest of it was Volkanovski running away with it. And you saw his accuracy keep going up and his volume keep going up as the rounds continued because he had made those adjustments and made those reads. And I'm sure Volkanovski had even more adjustments he could have made in his back pocket, but he realized, no, I only need to make 2 adjustments to beat the shit out of this guy. This guy isn't even challenging enough for me to make 3 or 4 adjustments. That's how much better Volkanovski was.
A note to our loyal listeners: if you love the Southpaw Project, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. This will give you access to exclusive bonus content, as well as our private chat group on Discord. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at patreon.com/southpawpod.
The way he used his jab was, it seemed sort of regimented but it is actually quite complex. It seems regimented and formulaic, but he's quite complex in what he's doing, where he throws that jab as a disruptor to the constant feints that was being implemented by Holloway to draw out those counters. So, like, he can take something that is simple and formulaic and build in complexity because the way his fight mind works. And I don't know if his coaches are like all watching or have earpieces in, and they have like eight like fight geniuses watching the fight on pay-per-view, and then they're like texting and calling them into their earpiece and telling them what they fucking see. Or is Volkanovski just that kind of a natural talent to be able to make those in-fight decisions? Because it honestly looked like, I don't know, it looked like the Patriots dynasty at their best when they were just beating everybody with like, I don't know, depending on who they had on the field. It didn't matter. Their decision-making showed that they were one step ahead. And that's sort of what I felt like we were watching. It was just really, really impressive shit especially if you know how good Max Holloway is. You know, his entire body of work. And I think without a doubt, that's the story of the fight.
Now let's talk about Israel Adesanya versus Jared Cannonier.
Do we have to? I kid.
To that point, what's somewhat become a trademark of Adesanya's fights is his entrances are sometimes better than his fights. And with both him and Volkanovski on the same card, I feel like Volkanovski really came out of Adesanya's shadow and proved, at least to us hardcores, that he is the best fighter from that region. It's not that Volkanovski takes more risks. It's that Volkanovski can do things Adesanya can't without leaving himself vulnerable. Volkanovski can be offensive while defensive, whereas Adesanya still can mostly do one or the other and really needs to set things up for a long time before he can get his offense going. Meaning he is very good, but not so much better where he can style on people like Volkanovski can. And Volkanovski is in the tougher division. And to your question, Jason, about fight geniuses calculating with each other on Volkanovski's team, I think Adesanya proved that there's no such thing. It's really Alex, because even though Volkanovski has his own camp in Australia, they do a lot of co-training with City Kickboxing, and City Kickboxing people are also in his corner, and they do a lot of mutual exchange of information, right? So let's just say, to make it simple, they basically have the same team, and you saw 2 different results. That difference is Volkanovski.
Well, and to your point, where Adesanya always seems to toe the company line. And I got $3 million in the bank. You sure as fuck fight like they don't pay you enough to get hit, right? That's how you fight, bro. I'm just saying, like you can talk that shit, but hey, man, like I know you wanna suck up and toe the company line. I get it, but like you fight like they don't pay you very well.
I feel the same way about Adesanya just because it's like he's interesting to me mainly because like you mentioned, he's trying to become this UFC company man, even though Dana White doesn't fucking like you, dude. Like I don't know,
Right.
that's really like my like what confuses me. He's like, dude, he does not like you. Why do you think he gave an unranked fighter, the number 4 contender, who he knew he was going to knock out, despite it seeming like he was going to push it early, so he could fight you specifically? He doesn't want you to have that belt. So I don't understand why he's even trying to like be this UFC company man that they don't even want him to be. They don't want him to be the face of the UFC because of all the reasons that you just pointed out. You know.
Exactly. And I had this conversation with Sam. Like, I wish, because I like Adesanya as a fighter, and I wish that but I hate the UFC and I hate Dana White, right? Which, if you've listened to any past episode, that's pretty clear. Um, so, like, Adesanya lost me when he started trying to curry favor with Dana and the company brass. So, especially with the crypto shit and that like horrible commercial or what, I thought it was a meme, for Christ's sake. It was so fucking bad. Sam was like, "No, man, that's real." Like, I don't think, Sam, I think you're wrong. He's like, "No, it's definitely real." Like, all right, it was really poorly done. I think they photoshopped the crypto shirt on him. He's like, "Yeah, that's exactly what they did," and then they just launched it. But I digress. If Adesanya was like, "Hey, man, like pay me this, and I'll, you want some more steam and some more heat, I'll bring it," then I would, I would defend him, tried and true, for taking that stand. But to be simultaneously a company guy and then be, fight the what is a relatively lackluster performance, that he took the rare chance in this if he took any in this fight, and it made it a relative snooze fest and what I thought could have been a barn burner if both parties would have decided to engage. And I think that's what we got to also give some, like, Cannonier can do more than just push you against the cage too. Like, anyone who's wrestled knows this. Sometimes you can wrestle someone pretty close without doing a fucking thing, even if they're a lot better than you. But you don't open up. If you don't open enough, then all of a sudden, like, you look like you lost to a 4-time All-American by 4 points. But really, you got dominated for every second of that fight positionally. You just didn't give up any points most of the time. So, I mean, you can get dominated, and the score can not necessarily be reflective of that.
In the lead up to this fight, Adesanya said he was going to show stuff that people had never seen before, which is something we've heard from him a lot, that he is so much better than all these guys, especially he knew he was a favorite over Cannonier. This is his chance to really show what he can do. I think in the promo, he was saying there's all these moves he's always wanted to try. This is the fight where you're going to see it. You're going to see him styling on Cannonier because now he finally has an opponent that he could do that to, and he just couldn't do it this time. So I think he might have overestimated himself. We said in the preview, this was going to be an easy fight to pick, but I can't necessarily say that this ended up being an easy fight for Adesanya because he still had to be very conservative and play a points game to win this fight. He clearly won, and it was not close. But with that said, I think the commentators undersold the hard time Cannonier was giving Adesanya. He did much better than Holloway did, even though Holloway is the far better fighter. So, Ron, what was Cannonier doing that was giving Adesanya a hard time? Because Adesanya was getting hit quite a bit, and it seemed like Adesanya was having a hard time really hurting Cannonier or getting him to respect his power.
Yeah, I think that's really the main thing. I don't think Cannonier really respected his power. And especially in the later rounds, he started to fight like it. Now, granted, he still, Cannonier still didn't tee off as much because he did understand that, Israel Adesanya, there is a huge counter-punching threat there if you swing too wild. But at the same time, in order to really be defensively responsible, you got to be a little bit offensive at the same time. You can't just stand there and get picked apart by a guy he's probably like a true just counter striker as far as like I'm going to lay back here. And even if I throw 10 punches this whole fight, as long as you get 0 to 2 on me, I'm good. Fuck the crowd, even though, you know, he says all these things about like him doing stuff, but let's be real, Israel is just not gonna fight that way because that's not the type of fighter he is. And he probably knows it himself, but he just has to play it up for whatever reason. And Cannonier was doing, I kind of wish he did a little bit more in the clinch specifically, even though that probably wasn't really a part of his game plan. Maybe it was, I'm not sure. But there were a couple times, I believe, in the fourth and fifth round where he caught Adesanya with like a couple of clean elbows off the break in the clinch, which is something that, in general, a lot of MMA fighters would should really find useful. And there's a few fighters who, made a whole name off of throwing elbows off the break in the clinch. But, you don't see it a whole lot. And Cannonier was able to pull it off a couple times. And the times where he was really like teeing off on Adesanya in the later rounds was when he had Adesanya on the back foot and he didn't bite on the feints too much, which is something that Adesanya is really good at as far as like getting people. He looks very pretty. He's a very pretty striker. He's the type of guy, like, for example, if you were to spar Israel Adesanya, even light sparring, you might spend an entire round basically doing nothing because you're just so mesmerized by how he moves, his flexibility, his like the way he like throws punches, even though he probably didn't even hit you like once, which is something I guess a lot of fighters tend to fall for. Then he starts making his reads, then he tees off, then he wins a decision or he catches you in a counter strike. And then as Cannonier started to push the pace a little bit more, he started to find more success a little bit. But by the time he started really finding success, the fight was basically over. So we didn't really get to see him build off of that or capitalize on it that much.
Yeah, that makes me wonder how much of it was Cannonier like having legitimate success, or how much was it Izzy coasting. So that's
Yeah.
sort of hard for me to ascertain, because at times, I mean, fucking Izzy just looks a little bored in there. I mean, I think he's one of those guys with an otherworldly skill set. So I don't want to take anything away from him for being. And when I say lackluster, I just mean in terms of entertainment value, which makes me a bit of a hypocrite because I say winning is priority. But you want to be the company man, be the fucking company man. Be consistent. is my only point. Again, I always take this off topic and make it about Dana White, so I apologize.
Jason, did this fight reveal to you any openings in Adesanya's defense?
I saw more openings in Izzy's defense when he sparred Volkanovski.
Yeah.
He had a tough time with Volk crushing that distance. What you see is that, like, in order for these challengers to beat Israel Adesanya, they're going to have to layer their attack. And to layer their attack, they're going to have to be good at multiple things. And what would you say that Cannonier's like best skill is?
I would say his power punching, right? That's his thing. He hits hard and he's durable. He's not like one of those glass cannons. There's a lot of that. People who hit hard but can't be hit hard back.
Yes.
I think Cannonier is that person who could hit hard and take a hard shot.
Hell yeah. He's fucking granite. He hits incredibly hard and he can take a shot. And I imagine, like, when he checks your kicks, that hurts. Even when he doesn't check his kicks, his muscles look like fucking stone. So my point is, if that is your ability, if you are a power puncher and you are durable, then you're fighting for a world title against a fighter who, in Israel Adesanya, is not really pushing a pace. Did he think he was going to sit back and outscore Adesanya, or did he think he was going to push him against the cage and make it ugly? But he didn't do enough of that with any true layered attack, other than sort of fighting. It seemed like he sort of fought to keep it close. And Adesanya was fine with that because he never felt any real threat. You got someone in Cannonier who can punch and kick. He's a strong, strong man. Well, sometimes you got to go and get in the thick of shit and realize it might get a little messy. And hey, that is your best chance at winning. The problem is it's also your best chance of getting knocked out by Israel Adesanya. But it's the fight game, and I would rather get knocked out or see my athlete get knocked out trying than coast to say I went the distance with a champ who actually stopped fighting midway through the third.
I'll give credit to Cannonier's camp because they seem like they made some good reads. It's just that Cannonier wasn't the person to pull it off. It seemed like they saw that there were openings when Adesanya escapes. There's a way that Adesanya often escapes, which is using footwork like Volkanovski, except not as layered or as good as Volkanovski, which is he'll L step back and then just circle away. And Cannonier, which we just talked about, he's a power puncher. He's not the greatest technical striker, but Cannonier found success where as Izzy was trying to circle away, Cannonier would throw a wide hook and catch him a couple of times. And also because Cannonier, he was a heavyweight at one point. So even though he's not super tall, he has a frame that's really large, meaning he's very wide, right? So his reach is actually still very much like a heavyweight's. So times that Adesanya tried to lean back, Cannonier found some success. Not enough to win, but enough to tell me that that's something they were working on. And another thing that Ron pointed out were the feints, not to bite on feints. That was also key to Cannonier keeping the fight close. But he bit on them enough where Adesanya still walked away with an easy decision. Ron, as a Muay Thai fighter, what do you think another striker could do to beat Adesanya? Like, what would Alex Pereira have to do to beat Adesanya?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I actually recently took the time to rewatch both of their kickboxing matches. And for the audience members who've probably seen like the clip of the second match where Adesanya gets knocked out, that's at most like 15 seconds. To put it into perspective, to keep it simple, the first match was a win by Alex Pereira, but it really wasn't a win. It was kind of a robbery. Now, a lot of people are now not saying it was a robbery. And these are like comments recently now that people know who Alex is. But even under kickboxing rules, especially if you turn the volume off, it was a pretty easy Israel Adesanya win. But it's a loss on his record, so whatever. And then the second fight, Israel, considering what happened in the first fight, came out more aggressive, which you won't really use. If you watch his kickboxing fights, similar style, but he's far more aggressive than he is in the UFC for sure. And he came out more aggressive against Alex Pereira, styling on him the whole fight. Then he gets knocked out near the end of the fight, but he was winning up until that point. And if you were to tell me if they fought kickboxing a third time, who would win, I would probably say Israel Adesanya. If they fought MMA now, I'd probably give it to Pereira. Why? Because with those 4-ounce gloves, Pereira's punches are the difference maker. And not only, he's not just a power puncher, his setups are sophisticated and they've actually improved since even though he's not a pro kickboxer now, his setups for that left hook that he throws have improved because he's not just headhunting anymore, which is what he did in the previous Adesanya fights that even though he won them, he was headhunting a lot in both those fights. Even against Strickland, despite all the plethora of mistakes that Strickland made, Pereira kept a pretty technical strategy. And if you notice early on in that fight, he was really only throwing jabs and straights to the body. Like he did a low jab to the body at an angle, still keeping his hands low, but kind of backing up, baiting Strickland. And then Strickland basically walks right into a check hook that sends him to the shadow realm, not really take into account like, hey man, like he's touching you with his lead side so he can set that up, right? The one punch that literally everybody in the world knows him for, right? Strickland, what are you doing? Oh crap, there he goes. So that was pretty much the name of the game for that fight. Now, an Izzy fight is definitely not going to be as easy as that. However, because of, like you mentioned before, because of the way he moves and how he escapes after certain strikes and how he uses his defense and evasive movement, there is a strong possibility that the exact same thing can happen again if he gets even a little bit lazy with Pereira, because Pereira has enough kickboxing knowledge and experience to actually have a layered offense and defense compared to other people in that weight class. Because just to be blunt and not to really shit on a lot of MMA strikers, because MMA striking has improved. As much as I have a completely different standard, I'm kind of like Zach as far as like my standard for striking. I'm thinking specifically Muay Thai. I'm thinking like Stadium Muay Thai, K1, Glory, all that. That's my standard for striking. But MMA striking has improved leaps and bounds since even when I started doing Muay Thai. And even now, though, if you aren't able to have a layered offense, somebody like Izzy, who can just basically coast for most of the fight and win rounds and knows how to win rounds just enough to really coast, win an easy decision, not really take a whole lot of damage and make the fight pretty boring. Somebody like Pereira with layered offense, even if he doesn't represent a grappling threat, which would also help, but I don't see a whole lot of strong grapplers that can really give Izzy enough problems with good MMA grappling to really take him down to the ground right now, and that weight class specifically. So right now, I think if anybody's going to really take him out, it's Alex Pereira.
I don't know if you guys have noticed also, but if you look at Alex Pereira, even though he's tall and lanky and he's only a middleweight, he has massive fists. So I can understand why he's like in kickboxing a multiple weight champion, because he's probably hitting people with like Brock Lesnar fists too. So I think that's something that opponents don't recognize until it's too late. And they're like, oh, when they get hit, this is different.
So for those who don't know, for professional kickboxing, usually most international regulations give you glove sizes based on weight classes that are usually the same as boxing. So at my weight classes, I would fight with 8-ounce gloves, a little bit higher, 10-ounce gloves. I think heavyweight, they can go up to 12-ounce gloves. So you got to keep in mind, this dude has been knocking people out, basically wearing 10 to 12-ounce gloves and knocking them out cold. They're not getting up. And now you gave him 4-ounce gloves in a division with people who pretty much don't really have the striking skills that he has. There you go right there.
So I think if you're somebody who's used to dodging a punch by leaning back or moving in a way where you miss the punch by an inch, I think that fist size might still nick you now, because it is just that much bigger, and that might be enough to really hurt you.
If you love the Southpaw Project, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by financially supporting us on Patreon. It'll help us supplement the cost of running this project, the incredible time and energy we put into it 7 days a week. And you'll be giving us some breathing room, not only to juggle Southpaw with our day jobs, but also to expand Southpaw into other areas. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at patreon.com/southpawpod.
Speaking of Pereira, what did you think about his performance over Sean Strickland?
I find it amusing because Strickland said, and he's right on this. He said if Pereira had a normal physical stature, that he wouldn't be world class, right? And that may be true, but Pereira does have super physical attributes, and Strickland fought him like he fucking didn't, even after addressing them prior. And that's my problem. I'm like, man, you pointed that out and then fought him with your hands down. And you tried to walk. I mean, like, you went Johnny Walker 2.0 and just walked after him in the first 2 minutes, man. What do you fucking think was going to happen? Like, I get it. You're tough. You love to fight. All right. You say those things all the time. All right. It was clever the first time. It was sort of funny the third. Your inability to read a fucking room after the third and fourth time you say the same joke as if cameras aren't recording it. We've all been there. We've all seen it. We've all heard it. Right? Yes, fighters fight, but world-class fighters fight in a world-class manner. And it takes more than just toughness and a love of fighting. So, hey, I appreciate Sean Strickland's love of fighting, which is really more or less a love of violence, which is fucking weird and sociopathic, but that's a different discussion. But Pereira has immense physical tools. He is very long. He can take a shot and he can give a shot. And to Sam, your point about like why Izzy is so hard to take down, when you have that kind of length and you dig your feet into that space between the cage panels and the mat, like, it's hard to move someone from there. You don't have an angle. You can't continue to make up that distance and take the back or anything like that, because you can't morph them through the cage. They're there and their stance is long and wide. People are getting better and better about using the cage to stay upright. And at 185 pounds, it seems like the wrestling is getting worse and worse. for anyone that's not named Derek Brunson, and even his seems shittier and shittier. So the match to make is going to be Pereira versus Israel Adesanya. I'd like to get some more data, some more MMA data on Pereira, because like what Strickland did was just fucking silliness.
I'm not going to name names, but there were a lot of MMA analysts, other MMA breakdown podcasts that said Strickland would outstrike Alex Pereira. So I think that's part of why the odds were favoring Strickland, even though we knew Strickland wasn't going to go for a takedown, because people actually thought Strickland would outstrike him because of what Ron talked about. Those previous Adesanya fights, they kind of took the wrong message. Ron is saying, yeah, he looked like that, but he would be even more devastating with small gloves. Whereas a lot of people who fancy themselves as really good at understanding MMA watch those fights and they're like, oh, Pereira is overrated. I thought he beat Izzy twice and he's just that much better than everybody. But looking at it now, he's not that good. He got lucky, right? And so they picked Strickland to outstrike him. And then we saw what we saw.
But what fucking Strickland fights are they watching to make that assessment? Because you're not going to beat a world champion kickboxer with just a fucking day one walk-in jab and no hand position.
He was going to beat him with the Strickland shoulder roll.
That's all, right? And Christ, and if you kept walking at Pereira like that, I wouldn't be surprised if Pereira blast fucking doubled him, because he was crossing his feet, he was walking straight forward.
Jason, I was thinking that while I was watching the fight. I'm like, look at him. If Pereira wanted to, even without good wrestling, he could probably just take him down.
Just a basic day one football tackle, for sure. Just running through the hips. That's all. And and I say it all the time. If you want to call yourself a world-class fighter, you have to do world-class shit.
Yes.
Right? Exactly. The term layered fighting should be a staple in the vernacular of every coach from this point forward, because you have multiple disciplines in mixed martial arts. That's the mixed component. So quit saying, oh, I'm a striker, I want to bang. No, then go do kickboxing or boxing and understand that you can use other tools to make the tools you would like to use even better. You can sharpen those tools based on the juxtaposition of those skill sets. And you can add them to your repertoire and make what it is you want to do more available to you than just complaining about it. So Strickland, I would recommend you learn more than a jab and to rely on ego and anger as your like primary motivator to fight. Try getting really, really good at fighting, because you have the toughness and you have the tools. Like, he punches with good stiff stuff when he does it correctly, but to disrespect the sport technically does him a disservice, and he fucking paid for it, didn't he?
Yeah, and let me add to that as well, as far as just, especially my biggest frustration is with strikers in MMA, even the ones who I know come from good striking disciplines or good striking backgrounds, this mentality of just thinking that you can, if I'm going to make it to the world level just by being super rudimentary and not adding anything to my game, because I don't need to add anything else to my game, because fuck you. That's basically the mentality a lot of these guys have.
That's exactly it.
Training with them for so long, being around them, they want to be the jack of all trades, but they want to be the jack of all trades, but they won't want to be the master of none, because that's going to require them to tone down their ego a little bit. And Sean Strickland is the epitome of that, if I've seen it in anybody else. And so you got guys who, come from striking backgrounds thinking they're gonna be world level. Yet I'm in the gym with them. I'm doing more jiu-jitsu classes part-time as a no-strike white belt than they are, and they're the ones getting ready for an MMA fight. They're coming in maybe doing a little bit of pad work here and there, mostly sparring, because they literally said it on the fight. Yeah, Sean Strickland just loves to spar. He loves to spar. And I'm listening. I'm like, oh yeah, he's definitely that guy who just fucking comes in for sparring, wants to be a bully in sparring. You ask him to do a few sprints after practice, he's out. I know he's that type of person just by the way he acts,
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know all his training habits, but he fought so poorly, did Sean Strickland, that like even the alt-right, alt-white fan base of mixed martial arts were like, he's not on our team. He's not with us. That's how fucking bad he fought. It was that bad.
Yeah.
And it was comedic because he had his hands like chest high, and he was just like walking forward as if the rules of violence and fighting and mixed martial arts didn't apply to him. And like, yeah, man, I get it. Like, you hate cancel culture. Let's hear that story again. Let's talk. It's like, hey, man, you didn't get canceled. You got abandoned because
Oh my god.
you are not the great white hope. You are the great white dope. You fucking embarrassed yourself. You embarrassed yourself.
Oh my God. All right. Now let me do a poll. Pedro Munoz versus Sean O'Malley ended in a no contest. But who did you have winning before that ending? Ron?
I had Pedro winning.
Jason?
I thought the leg kicks were the difference, right? Hell, did Pedro even land a punch to the head? Which tells you if you can beat Sean O'Malley with strictly leg kicks, he's got some improving to do.
I think in that round and a half, or nearly a round and a half, Munoz showed O'Malley is still very hittable. Now let's preview RDA versus Fiziev. I'm really excited for this one, and lately the fight nights have been better than the pay-per-views, mostly because there are so many good fighters, especially from Europe and Central Asia, coming up right now. There has just been better MMA from these fighters, and as Jason likes to put it, this is MMA done right. And we're seeing that not only with Fiziev, but also with the veteran RDA. Fiziev has won his last 5. RDA, since dropping back down to 155, beat both Paul Felder and Renato Moicano, and is still proving he's still one of the best at 155. RDA is not someone who shoots blind takedowns or takedowns from too far away. He will engage with strikes, and his strikes lead him to his takedowns. And for Fiziev, I'm sure he's used to southpaw strikers, but how good is he defending against takedowns from southpaws? I think that combination of striking plus takedowns from southpaw adds a new wrinkle. So how does RDA deal with the striking of Fiziev, and how does Fiziev deal with the double offensive threat of RDA?
Well, I think the question is the answer, right? For RDA, he has got to work his double offensive threat. And the more he can establish some wrestling to coincide with his striking, the more effective he's going to be with keeping Fiziev from just going like just that barnstorm approach of like mixing together punch, punch, kick, those sequential combinations where he's throwing everything with full force. It's fun to see, but when there is a wrestling component, then and you have someone who can, you saw what RDA did in the Felder fight, and we can talk about short notice, but it just shows how good RDA's skill set is at dealing with someone who comes at him with really a one-dimensional approach. I guess one dimension doesn't really, it's a two-dimensional approach as opposed to a 3D approach in this thing. So, you gotta meet the combination threat with a combination threat of your own, right? And it doesn't have to necessarily be wrestling and striking. It can be like sometimes you fight on the lead, rhythm changes, disruptions of timing, working something. I mean, Volkanovski, everybody should be watching that as a masterclass fight study on how to get good at dealing with. It doesn't matter what your skill set is. The way he fights you throws you off balance. So for Fiziev, he's going to have to do something to break RDA's rhythm, to mess up the timing, the rhythm, and keep RDA at least somewhat off balance. If he fails to do that, I wouldn't be surprised if this fight looks similar to RDA versus Felder.
Ron, what are some things that Fiziev does that you've liked?
So the things that Fiziev does that I do like are also, ironically, the things that could actually leave him vulnerable against somebody with the layered weapons that RDA has, which is mainly the way he structures his combinations, which is very like, being able to train internationally, even fight internationally, and witness how a lot of these Central Asian fighters fight. They love sequencing combos, and they do a very good job at it, because a lot of these guys don't really pigeonhole themselves in only one striking art. A lot of these kickboxers are also doing boxing, Muay Thai. A lot of these Muay Thai fighters are probably doing boxing, just regular kickboxing fights as well. Even some of them grapple themselves just because they just want to do everything. And he's very good at throwing combinations and throwing them hard and heavy. Whereas a lot of MMA fighters, a lot of the commentary might call them combinations, but like, a looping hook, looping hook, maybe like a leg kick at the end of it. It's like, all right, it's not, yes, that's a combination, but there's more to it than just I throw 3 wide punches, maybe, oh wait, I can throw a kick as well. Whereas Fiziev, everything is he's looking for setups, he's waiting, and then he wants to explode on you with a specific combination. Now the downside to that is that Rafael dos Anjos can hold his own striking. And as a Muay Thai fighter, I'm say this with like Dos Anjos has one of the best body kicks I've ever seen from a guy who's not necessarily a Muay Thai fighter in MMA. Like his body kicks are like that's like almost perfect Muay Thai, the way he throws his body kicks.
Are you talking about his left kick to the liver? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, his left body kick is amazing. I love his left body kick. That's why I love watching his fights. A lot of people ask me, they're like, "You're like a Muay Thai fighter. Like, why do you like?" I'm like, just watch his left body kick. That's Muay Thai. That's good Muay Thai right there. You know, a strong left kick to the body. If you watch Stadium Muay Thai, there's a reason why a lot of these guys winning belts are southpaws, because a left body kick, for some reason, similar to like a lead left hook, if you're in a orthodox or right-handed stance, seems to be almost unblockable for a lot of guys. I still haven't figured out why. When I figure it out, I'll be sure to let everybody on this podcast know, because y'all deserve it. But, left body kicks are hard to deal with. And the problem with left body kicks, too, depending on your stance, is that that's where the liver is at. And even if somebody's not a better striker than you on paper, I guess, if somebody's got a good like lead side strike that is aimed near your liver or around that area, it doesn't take a whole lot for your night to get ruined fast. Now, that probably won't happen this fight, but you combine the fact that Dos Anjos isn't afraid to strike, and he has layers to be able to get it to the ground rather than just only being reliant on the ground. He can get it there in a natural way without sacrificing his defense. That's going to give Fiziev some issues, and he's going to have to figure out a way to be able to tee off those combinations without putting himself at risk in the grappling arena.
This is a tough fight for RDA, but the odds have Fiziev as the favorite, which is kind of surprising since RDA has more ways to win. With that said, Fiziev also has a wrestling background. However, RDA normally has problems with bigger, taller fighters, especially wrestlers, whereas this will be someone his same size and someone who likes to mostly strike. This is also a 5-round fight, which favors RDA, especially since this is Fiziev's first 5-round main event. We saw how that changed things for Arman Tsarukyan. So Jason, what does RDA need to do to win and take advantage, especially of that 5-round main event change?
So with it being a 5-round main event, cardio is going to be key. And so part of that is going to be using the dual threats of striking and wrestling, adding cage pressure. And if you consider the decision-making RDA showed in the Felder fight, you talk about next level shit. People will always refer to, well, Felder was piecing him up. That's true. But every time Felder pieced him up, he got taken down because the takedown was what was available to RDA. And if you think that you're just going to come at him with nothing but pressure, you better hope you catch him. Because if not, RDA has good cardio. He can take a shot, and then he'll get to your hips when you overcommit to striking, and he'll take you down with relative ease. He's not always working super hard for those finishes of his takedowns. So I would push the dual threats, make sure your cage pressure is there, make Fiziev work, hang heavy on those arms, good strong head position when you get him against the cage, hand fighting, make it dirty and ugly against the cage, especially when Fiziev's back's against it. And that's where I think this fight is going to be won.
Ron, what does Fiziev need to do to beat RDA, and what does he need to change to go 5 rounds if need be?
He needs to be patient. And I say that because the thing that I notice a lot, specifically, I'm familiar with Fiziev because he's actually, he might still be in Thailand. I didn't do my research. I'm not sure where he's at. I know he was the striking coach at Tiger for a while. So I'm assuming he's probably still training in Thailand. But he fights mostly like a, I guess what we would call like a Dutch style kickboxer. Heavy hands, usually finishing off with a kick of some sort. Usually 3, maybe 4 punch combination, finish with a kick. 3 to 4 punch combo, finish with a kick. And a lot of the reason, if you watch international kickboxing, a lot of the reason that these fights aren't really 5 rounds fights like they are in I guess traditional Muay Thai fights is because the big thing, everything scores equally in kickboxing fights. So everything is about, I just got to be more active. I got to go, 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 go. And I just got to rack up and I just got to overwhelm people. But when it comes to a 5-round fight, you have to kind of just pack your patience a little bit, because even if you do get going early on in the first couple of rounds, Rafael dos Anjos is not a stranger to a 5-round fight. And again, he has multiple threats that he can use, that even though Fiziev has wrestled, I think Dos Anjos is probably better at combining his striking with his wrestling better than Fiziev as of now, based on just what I've seen and what I know of Dos Anjos. And because most of Fiziev's fights have been, other than maybe engaging in the clinch every now and then, which he does some good work in, he ain't going to shoot for a takedown, I would assume. So I think he just has to be just a little bit more conservative. Not, he's not like, he doesn't have to change his whole style or anything. He just has to be aware that, there's more to worry about with Rafael dos Anjos, because he's still a world-class fighter even now. And we've seen that in his last couple of fights. Like, even though Paul Felder took the fight on the week notice, people don't do that to Paul Felder. Let's be real. So, this is going to be a tough fight for Fiziev. So this will also be a good opportunity to show how he's evolved so far as a mixed martial artist, not necessarily a striker who's doing mixed martial arts. It's like, all right, like, are you a well-rounded mixed martial artist now? How do you put up with this current threat in front of you who can bang with you and who can take you to the ground without really taxing themselves?
And one thing I do want to mention, which may or may not be relevant for this fight, but when we saw Fiziev go the full 3 rounds with Bobby Green, we saw that he did slow down and he did start to get tired. And that is how Bobby Green started to catch up and make the fight close. So that was only 3 rounds. Will that matter this time around? I don't know. Maybe from that fight, he's learned how to pace himself differently, or he's changed some things up with his cardio, but he is also a massive man for the division. He is built like a truck. So that is a lot of size to carry around. I don't know how much weight he's cutting. He's not super tall though. So these are all things to consider.
Yeah, no, for sure. Cardio is going to be key. And one thing I will say is, Fiziev will cross center line shoulder square from time to time with all his movement. And he becomes very hittable, especially when he starts to get tired. And RDA has a great straight left. He's got a good right hook. So if you start keeping your shoulders square, no matter, even if you are the better striker, a mistake is a mistake. And if mistakes are born of fatigue, then look for RDA to start to capitalize, even in the striking component, in rounds 3, 4, and 5.
All right. That's it for this episode. Ron, give us your handles online and your handle on the Southpaw Discord so people can find you.
All right. Well, my handle on the Southpaw Discord is Jodeci Joestar. And online, my username on Twitter is Grappler Ronnie, which is funny because I'm predominantly a Muay Thai fighter. And then my name should be Jodeci Joestar on there. I don't usually use my face as a profile picture. I just use anime profile pictures. I'm that guy. Yes, I know. But yeah, that's pretty much my social media presence outside of Instagram, which I don't really use that often.
All right. If you like what we do, sign up for the Patreon. We also have the Liberation Martial Arts program if you want to train with us from wherever you are. You can also find that on our Patreon. You can find Southpaw merch at our store. You can find all pertinent links on the show notes. With all that said, thanks for listening.